Hey guys, so I'm going to talk about something today that I already know is going to stir up some comments or some opinions. And some people are going to be a little bit butthurt about what I'm going to say. But I do ask that you watch to the end just to hear the whole story about, or I guess, get the whole picture of what I'm about to talk about today. And that's tire rotations and why I think that they're not necessary. And honestly, they're really just an upsell from the dealership side of things. And especially on modern cars, you're actually not really doing yourself a favor doing tire rotations at all. Um, just a quick background for those of you who are maybe here on this channel for the first time. I'm a full-time technician here in Germany, previously worked for BMW, and I currently work at a Porsche dealership. Um, and in all my time at the dealership, I have not done a single tire rotation. Been doing this a couple of years, and it's not been on any checklists that we have. It's not been recommended by any service advisor. It's not even been talked about by any shop foreman or master techs here. So tire rotations are just not a thing here in Germany. And now I'll get into the theory of why I think they shouldn't be a thing anywhere. I already know that this is gonna stir up a little bit of drama, but I guess, let's just get into it. Okay, so before we talk about managing and balancing tread depths and why that's not exactly super relevant, we need to talk about the two types of traction loss that occur in normal driving conditions and which one is more dangerous when it comes to vehicle dynamics and safety for your average driver. So principally, you have understeer and oversteer. So what is understeer? Understeer is where you turn the wheel in, but the car keeps on going straight. It's not, obviously that would be an extreme case if it really goes like this, but let's say that you want to take a relatively sharp left turn, and so you turn the wheel left, and the car kind of starts to turn, but you also notice that like within your lane, you're pushing out towards the outside of the lane. That's understeer. Oversteer is where, in that same scenario, you take the left turn, and all of a sudden you notice how the car isn't just turning left, but it's actually turning too much. So the nose of the car is starting to rotate or yaw more towards the inside of the turn. So how do both of those things happen? And why is it relevant for tire rotations, tread depths, blah, blah, blah? Understeer, which is where you turn the wheel and the car keeps going forward, happens when, in relation to the rear axle, the front axle loses traction. On the other hand, oversteer is where, in relation to the front axle, the rear axle loses traction. So what you'll notice in both of those scenarios is that the entire dynamics of the car is completely dependent on how much grip is at the rear. Because even in our understeer example, where you would say, well, actually understeer happens because the front loses traction. No. Understeer happens because, yes, the front loses traction, but the front loses traction in relation to the rear axle. So on the other example, on oversteer, the rear axle loses grip in relation to the front axle and tries to then overtake the front axle. Or basically, wherever the rear axle is going, the car wants to go, right? So our rear axle, there's a German word for this. It's called Spurführende Achse, but roughly translated to English, it's the track defining axle. Wherever your rear axle is pointed towards, that's where the car is going to try to go. So how does that relate to our topic of tire rotations, balancing tread depths, and evening out the wear? Well, the argumentation is that you basically want all four tires to have the same grip. And that makes sense until you think about the fact that for your average driver, oversteer, so again, the rear kicking out, is much more dangerous than understeer in average driving conditions. Because what happens with oversteer, where the rear kicks out, is that instinctually your average driver is going to come off the gas, again, then lifting the rear because you're now not accelerating anymore. You're now actually starting to slow down, so you lift the rear more. And then they're actually going to pump the brakes, which is then going to further exacerbate that problem, further reducing grip at the rear. On the flip side, when understeer occurs, what's going to happen is your average driver is going to turn in, realize that, oh, I'm not going to make this turn. They're going to come off the gas, which will then shift weight towards the front, pushing the tires more into the ground. And then they're going to, again, pump the brakes, which is then going to further exacerbate that and hopefully restore grip to the front, allowing you to make that turn. So when it comes to your average driver, you want understeer, not oversteer. So how does that relate to tire rotations and why does that matter? Well, by that logic, if you were to do a tire rotation, it wouldn't be just, front to rear or X or whatever. It would be, let's put the best tires that the car has on the rear, because you want to manage rear wheel grip. Obviously in just normal dry conditions, it's not going to really be all that crazy. But let's say that it's heavily raining outside and you just rotated your tires on a front wheel drive car from the fronts to rears. So you've now taken the tires that sat for 10,000 kilometers or more on the front, that powered the wheels, managed 70% of the braking, and did all of the steering of the car. And so you've worn those tires down and you now put them to the back. And it starts raining heavily, okay? So you just did a tire rotation, it's torrential rain outside, you're on the highway, and all of a sudden you see, even if you have the proper distance to the car in front of you, you see brake lights come on. So what do? Most people might even sort of get surprised by that. They're going to slam onto the brakes. So now you lift weight off of the rear axle, which now has the worse tires, and what you get is oversteer. This, by the way, is how stuff like spins on a completely straight highway happen. It's because people have worse rear tires than in relation to the front tires, and then have an emergency braking situation where they lift the weight off of the rear, and now the rear is trying to overtake the front. Not cool. That's like the number one thing that you want to avoid, because what would happen if the scenario was reversed? So like, let's say you have a rear wheel drive car where the rear is, let's say, a little bit more worn, even though that's not really true, in relation to the front, and now you rotate the better tires from the front to the rear and put the rear tires to the front. Let's take that same scenario. So now you have an emergency braking situation in torrential rain, you slam on the brakes and you lift the weight off the rear, but you still have the better tires in the rear, so you're still going to go in a straight line or brake in a straight line. So one might argue that, hey, that's actually, you just made the point exactly for tire rotations on rear-driven cars. Well, not really. And here's why. The fronts on a rear-drive car are still going to be pretty worn down, or maybe evenly worn down, again, evenly worn down, to the rears. Why? Well, because on most cars, like even on something like a 911, which I work on every day, the front manages most of the braking and all of the steering. So on a rear drive car, especially with that engine sitting up front, on a 911 it's way up back, but it doesn't matter. You're still going to have tires in the front that are worn down and are possibly even evenly worn down. And this is what I observed actually at my time at BMW. All of the rear drive cars had at most like a millimeter of difference in the tread depth front to rear. Are we really starting to move tires around for a millimeter of tread difference? I don't think that makes any kind of sense, and it's probably not worth it. Again, it's a safety issue. So, okay, what can we do to manage tire wear and tread depth balancing on a car? Because there are actually scenarios where you should do that. Again, based on what I just said, what you actually should be doing is putting the best tires that the car has towards the rear. Now, it's not always, again, this is not always also possible because, for example, a lot of BMWs and most Porsches have different width wheels and tires front to rear, so rotations kind of fall out of the picture at that point anyway. But nonetheless, if you're going to rotate tires, you should put the best ones to the rear. Don't do this whole front to back, crisscross, applesauce, whatever you're talking about. If you're going to rotate tires, put the best ones at the back. And I'm still going to argue that that doesn't make any sense. If you want to manage tire wear, you don't need a tire rotation, you need an alignment. So why am I making the point that if you want to manage your tire wear, you need an alignment versus a tire rotation? The reason for that is because the number one thing that's going to wear out your tires, like bar none, the number one thing that will just eat up tires is improper toe angles. What is a toe angle? So all you technicians are like, oh dude, you don't have to explain this to me, but let's just say that you're just a regular Joe Schmo, you want to know what toe is. If you look at the front of your car, so you're standing in front of your car, and you look at you look head on towards the tires. Toe is if the both tires look inward. Most of the time you can't see this, but the alignment computer can see this, and this is just a basic theory. Toe is if you have a toe in, the tires are looking towards the center of the car, and if you have toe out, the tires are looking towards the outside of the car. Most cars, honestly, even performance-oriented stuff, have a positive or toe-in setup. And the reason for that is if your tires are in relation to each other, front and rear, doesn't matter, they're pointing towards the center of the car is going to want to travel straight because, the tires are trying to go, the left tire is trying to go right, the right tire is trying to go left, they meet in the middle and the car just tracks straight, right? Track defining axle, the rear. So why is toe relevant for tire wear? Well, because let's say you have too much positive toe. The tires are angled in towards the center too much. Where you're now dragging, let's say that this is extreme, but this is your tire. You're now dragging that tire diagonally across the road. Okay, let's say that you have a toe out scenario. You'll feel that pretty quickly because the car feels nervous because both wheels are trying to go into opposing directions, right? The left is trying to go all the way to the left, the right's trying to go all the way to the right, and so you have a car that sort of jitters, and based on where the tires front to rear find grip, the car is going to sort of wander and dance around. But it's toe. If you really want to manage proper tire wear, what you really need is a regular alignment. Now I understand that people are going to hear that and be like, dude, do you know how much an alignment costs? I'm well aware. You're not going to show up once a year to get an alignment. No one does that, right? But here's the reason why, again, rotating tires in that scenario doesn't make any sense. Let's say that you have an alignment issue and your front right tire has too much positive toe, so you're just dragging that tire across the road, right? So now you say, okay, so in order to save my tires, I'm now going to rotate them. And so you take the better, or let's for that example, let's just say that the rear right tire has been experiencing a proper alignment at the rear, and you now put that to the front. Well, now you're destroying two tires instead of just one at the front. Because, and any technician will know this, if you've ever had a car on the lift that has an improper alignment setup, you'll notice that the tire is worn really weirdly. Like camber can do this too, where you have on the one side of, or usually on the inside of the tire, you have more wear than on the outside. But improper toe, you can sometimes feel it. Like if you run your hand across the tire, you can feel that it's like a saw blade, because you're dragging that tire across the road. So again, if we're going to talk about managing tire degradation due to driving conditions, we shouldn't be talking about tire rotations. We should be talking about regular alignments. So before everyone gets upset about the fact that I'm trying to take their tire rotations away, again, I'm not going to make a difference out here. I'm just trying to educate people. Look, if you're making a living off of oil changes, brakes, and tire rotations, I'm all for it. Whatever you need to do to get that paycheck, to clock and flag those hours, I'm for you. Continue doing those rotations. Don't deny that work. If customer wants it, customer is going to get it, right? It's okay. But this vehement fixation on rotating tires, it doesn't make sense to me. Like I said, if you really want to manage your tire degradation rates, you need an alignment. If you're really concerned that your tires are not living as long as they're supposed to, well, maybe you have the wrong tire. Maybe you're putting too much load on the tire that you've been putting onto your rims. Maybe you're towing too much. Maybe you're driving too spiritedly, in which case, well, you just need tires more often than Joe Schmo. Best example for this is my Toyota Yaris. I bought it with 100,000 kilometers on the odometer, and it now has like 162. And I went 62,000 kilometers on a set of front tires that, when I bought them, only had 4 millimeters of tread depth. And at 62,000 kilometers more on that tire, I was down to like 2. And so that's when I went and I replaced them. I didn't rotate them. The rear tires are still at around 4 millimeters. That just goes to show how little the rear axle is doing on a front wheel drive light car. So now you're starting to put the significantly worn down tires at the front towards the rear in the hopes of, managing tire wear, but you're putting the customer at significant risk. Because even if it's a front wheel drive light car, I can't get that thing to oversteer to save my life. But I'll guarantee you this: I'll spin that car if it's torrential rain and I have tires on the rear that I just rotated that have 2 millimeters of tread depth, and at the front it's 4. Double the tread depth at the front, and I do an emergency brake. I'll guarantee you'll spin that car. Again, if we're going to talk about taking care of the customer properly and properly managing tires and doing things the right way, tire rotations don't play into that at all. It's an upsell. That's my opinion. And I'm not attacking the technicians out there, again, who make a living off of doing rotations. Look, it's fine. If you need to do that to clock your hours, to flag your hours, I'm okay with that. But can we all stop, praising the tire rotation for being the ultimate tire saver? Because it's not. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If I pissed any of you off, I am sorry. I'm not attacking you. I'm just trying to, dispel a myth here. Hope you guys have a nice day. Have a nice weekend. It's Friday here. I had a really rough week. So, yeah. Catch you in the next one.